All right, guys, we're back. Um, yeah, let me pull this up here. Okay, we are ready to go. All right, you guys, podcast number 62. We're getting up there. So Sabine Hossenfelder is a theoretical physicist, science popularizer, and musician. Wow, it's early. I've already stumbled. She has a very popular YouTube channel that wrestles with everything math and physics. Her book, Lost in Math: How Beauty Leads Physics Astray. So I want to read this quote. This quote here. There are other reasons we use math in physics. Besides keeping us honest, math is also the most economical and unambiguous terminology that we know of. Language is malleable. It depends on context and interpretation, but math doesn't care about culture or history. If 1,000 people read a book, they read 1,000 different books. But if 1,000 people read an equation, they read the same equation. This is from Sabine Hossenfelder's Lost in Math: How Beauty Leads Physics Astray. Make sure you guys get that book. Hello, Sabine. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Travis. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to finally meet you and chat.
Sorry about the hair.
No worries. It's pretty early for me over here this morning, so I kind of just threw some goop in my hair, and here we go. Well, first of all, how are things on your side of the world?
Well, not going all that well, as I'm sure you've heard.
Yeah.
You know what this is? I just took out my Geiger counter. So that's the situation.
What is that?
That's a Geiger counter.
Oh,
It doesn't tick, but you know, you can
okay.
see what's going on.
So, I mean, I should get a little bit of your reaction if you feel like telling us, like, what. I mean, you're pretty close to the Ukraine. Like, what was your general first initial reaction when you heard of this declaration of war?
Well, so it's not that it was that surprising, right? I mean, things have been going on there for a long time, and we've had some advance warning, but it's considerably worse than I think anyone expected. So I don't really have a lot to say about it because I don't really understand what's going on. This is
Right.
really not my territory.
Sure.
But yeah, it's quite scary.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I know Germany has now sent some aid to the Ukraine, so yeah, I guess we'll just see how things work out. But stay safe, anyways. You know.
We do the best we can.
Yes. So first off, the Celebration of Science and Reason tour featuring Sabine and Lawrence Krauss is coming to Canada this April, which I'm so excited for. Everyone's been working so hard on our end to try and sell these events well and to get you guys on YouTube this free content eventually of these conversations. So Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver are scheduled for 90-minute discussions on various science topics, which we will finish each evening with a Q&A session. YouTube physics superstar Arvin Ash will join Sabine and Lawrence in Vancouver. So there's a little added bonus there. It is a bigger venue. We initially had Chris Hadfield booked, but for personal reasons, he's not able to do any live events right now, unfortunately. So, but anyways, you can get tickets for these events at pang-burn.com/tickets. I hope you guys come out. It's a celebration of science and reason. And that's kind of my first question, Sabine. Why do you think it's important to celebrate science? Like when I watch your channel, I feel this like I feel like it's a celebration of science, and I read through your comment section a lot, and I feel like everyone seems to be there for good faith reasons, trying to figure out what is going on in reality. Why is this such an important pursuit?
Well, you briefly cut out there, which is why I made a funny face in
Oh,
case someone noticed. But I think I get the question, roughly speaking. I think science is generally a way that we make sense of the world, and for a lot of people, that's kind of the go-to thing. Like if something doesn't make sense, you try to figure out what the scientists have found, how the pieces fit together. And it's also, in crazy times like this, it's kind of a retreat from all the sanity of the world. At least there's something that makes sense. So let's talk for a little bit about general relativity, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it has this escapism smell to it, you could see. But there's also, I mean, since you speak of a celebration of science and reason, I think to some extent it matters to me because I often feel that science isn't very well integrated in our societies. For many people, it's kind of this weird thing that people do in research and academia, which doesn't really have a lot to do with people. And for me, science is like really everywhere. Like it affects everything pretty much. And so I try to get this across a little bit. It's really a mode of thinking that you use to make sense of the world.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of ways that like, okay, there's science communication and ways that we can improve on that. And I think philosophy is a big part of that. But what about like, is there something we could be doing more to like have community involvement in the scientific endeavor? Like, I know we try to like maybe in clinical psychology we'll like pull large portions of populations to get kind of personality details and things like that, but is there more we can be doing to like use volunteers from the community maybe to further the scientific endeavor? Like I don't know, are we using the public as much as we can in the realm of science? Not not necessarily as lab rats, but like, like is there a way for people to like, oh, I'm gonna go volunteer at the lab today? Like I just don't hear a lot of opportunities like that.
Well, we do have some citizen science project going on, and I know a lot of people who are really excited about this. But I also have to admit, I think you're coming at it from a pretty opportunistic angle, right? Like,
That's
is there
me.
some way that we can use people? I'm more like, is there some way that people can make more use of us?
Right.
Right? I mean, isn't there something that we can give to them?
Right.
And I mean, one of the things, so this is like, this is why I like public events where you actually get in touch with people in a way that is very difficult to replace with online events, is that you want to integrate people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in think, for example, about going to church, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not religious, but I've been to church many times. And what a lot of religions are really good at is at this social aspect. Like they really integrate people, and they have traditions that people can relate to. And science just totally sucks at this. Like this entire social aspect just isn't there. And I remember when I was at Pyramid Institute, has a fairly strong outreach program. And for some time, they had regular public events on the weekend given by one of the researchers. And then afterwards, there was a kind of a brunch thing where people could just sit together. And the nice thing about this was that the people in the audience got to talk to each other, and so they formed this kind of community. And
Yeah.
they scrapped this at some point. I never really understood why, because I spoke to a lot of people and they really, really liked it. This just being together, and we have
Yeah.
some common interests. Let's talk about this. And this is something which I think scientists could do more. And we do see this online, of course. Like, I think this is what you see, for example, in the comment section on my channel. The people have similar interests and they find like-minded people and they build this community, and on Arvin's channel too, and many other channels. So it's this community thing
Yeah.
that YouTube is really good at.
Yeah, and I think you're right about like the live events as opposed to what we can do digitally. Like being there in person with people and getting the full breadth of the human experience of communication, I think is a lot different than what we can do. Even doing a podcast like this, it's much different than what I think a conversation is like in person. And I've produced many of these events now, and I can say that some of the best conversations that happen aren't necessarily the ones that happen on the stage. They're the ones that are happening between attendees in the lobby, having a debate in the lobby, or getting together for a drink after the event. Like, I notice a lot of that, and I think the more of these events, and you mentioned religion, because there is an important aspect to that, like, because there is that same type of, and I call it artistic inspiration, but that same type of charge that people get being there at a live, rejoice of something. We do it at concerts, like if we're going to our favorite, I don't know why ABBA's been stuck in my head, but ABBA's been stuck in my head this morning. But you go to your favorite ABBA concert or Elton John or whoever, and you get that religious like charge. I'm not religious either, but the way people describe the charge they get when they're with their religious community at church, that's the same thing I get when I'm, at one of these events, or I'm at my favorite music event. So I think we need more of this going on. I feel like it's something that the Greeks did really well that maybe we have lost since antiquity. I feel like there was more like open public square discourse. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think you do. I think you are totally right that we suck. That the scientific community on its own sucks at this, and I think, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, but I think a lack of philosophical knowledge and philosophical education in science communication is leading to this gap of misunderstanding when we're trying to figure out where people are getting things wrong when they're interpreting science, like from an epistemological or logic standpoint. It's like, how can we understand why people hate science, or why people hate like reading new things because they get so confused? How can we do better at that if we don't understand where they're making like logically fallacious errors?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. But I think there's actually a simpler reason, which is that a lot of people who go in science don't go really into science because they want to communicate with the public. So, this is
Right.
actually something which Americans are much better at least, what I've seen in the United States and also in Canada. They understand much better how important it is that you have some kind of education or at least experience with communication. Whereas in Europe, people are really, really behind with this. They kind of expect scientists to do science communication on the side.
Right.
And it works really badly. It's just because a lot of people who go into science aren't any good at it. And so I think they don't understand. It's a kind of profession that you have to learn it, and you have to figure out how it works. So that's where the problem, I think, starts. But then there's also what you just said. There's so many aspects to this. It is partly philosophy, but also, of course, psychology.
Yeah.
Sociology to some extent.
Art.
I think, yeah. I mean, there are many things that we just don't understand how people relate.
Yeah.
One thing with another thing. I mean, of course, my sample is heavily biased, but I've never really met someone who was totally opposed to science. I mean, people have a lot of reservations where they're like, scientists are going too far. That kind of sentiment. I get this quite often, but it's fairly rare for someone to outright say, no, science, not for me.
It's funny. That's typically been the case for me as well, but I've been attending some of these rallies, these anti-vaccine mandate rallies, and I see these signs that say science sucks, and I'm just like, science sucks? What are you talking about? Like, I understand how some people get frustrated when politicians try to, like, a politician or a politician's like communication advisor is tasked with trying to like communicate about like, oh, this new variant that's coming out, but they put this tone on it and they do this bit of fear mongering, and then I think people get very suspicious and they're like, And they're like, you're kind of telling me that they think science is telling me to be scared of X, but really, I mean, you can't get an ought from an is. So science really isn't saying that, but it's the science communicator that's doing this. So I think people get the method mixed up with the madness of apes sometimes. And yeah. I wanted to ask you, and I know we only have an hour here. So, is there anything in particular that you and Lawrence Krauss beef about, that you disagree about in the realm of physics? One thing I'll bring up is, Krauss, I think, he has popularized this idea that pre-Big Bang states are nothing, in a sense, and I think this is something I argue about with Lawrence quite a bit. What do you think about this concept of nothing being used in that way?
Yeah, I'm on your side, as I think pretty much everybody else I know. I've written a new book which is coming out. I mentioned this already, like in August, and I have a comment on this in my book, which is just that a quantum vacuum is not nothing. Right, so it's definitely something, but of course in the end it all comes down to definition. So what do we argue about? I mean, I think so. I did this podcast with him a couple of months ago, and I think the major points of disagreements were about this idea of naturalness, which I say is really just an aesthetic bias. And I think he doesn't really buy my argument. So that was the one thing. The other thing is dark matter. So I'm kind of on dark matter. I'm constantly changing my mind. Like, is it a particle? Is it modified gravity? Yeah. He seems to be strongly on the particle side.
Yeah, that's a really weird one, and like. Also, dark energy as well. Like, what do you make of dark energy? How do you describe it, at least thus far? And then I'm of course I'm going to ask you to place your bet on what you think it might be. But what do we know about dark energy thus far, if anything?
Pretty much nothing. So, I mean, what we can reliably say is that it's very well described by a constant, which is just the cosmological constant. And so my opinion is basically, for all I know, it's a constant of nature, and that's it. So I don't really know what people even mean when they say there's something to explain, because I can't think of anything simpler than a constant of nature.
And when you say a constant of nature, just like an emergent quality of nature that is, like, how would you further describe that to a layman?
Well, it could be emerging from something else, but we don't have any evidence that it is. It's just, so it's like the gravitational constant. It has to be something, and then we just go and measure it, and it gives us a value. And then we can ask, as a lot of physicists ask, like, why does it have the value that it has?
Right.
Wouldn't it be good if we had a better explanation? And I agree, but then in the end, maybe there just isn't one. Maybe that's just how it is, right?
Okay, now always the begging question in the room: are we going to find a particulate representation of gravity? Do you suspect that we will, to unify the standard model?
Oh, yeah. So you mean a theory of quantum gravity?
Not sure. I mean, there's been a lot of talk throughout history about the graviton. Does the graviton, or will we find the graviton? Does the graviton exist? What do you suspect?
It's one of those things that I keep changing my mind about. So, so the reason I would say probably most physicists who have ever thought about the issue, I would say that the graviton probably exists. So the issue is we can quantize gravity the same way that we quantize the other interactions, say electromagnetism.
Yeah.
And then what we normally use is the field in the classical limit, so the gravitational field. It becomes associated with the particle, which in the case of gravity is the graviton, and for electromagnetism it's the photon, and then there are some other particles for the strong and weak nuclear force. And that's pretty straightforward, actually. It was done in the 1950s, 60s. But then the problem is, if you look close at this theory, it turns out that as a fundamental theory, it doesn't make sense because it breaks down at some energy. And then there's the question, like, exactly what's the problem, right? Do we have to throw out this quantization entirely, or is it still good in some approximation, in which case the graviton would exist? And then it depends on which perspective you take. If you think that this perturbative quantization is at least approximately correct, then you would say, of course, the graviton exists. But if you say, well, actually, this whole quantization thing is a non-starter to begin with, we shouldn't be quantizing gravity, because the often named analogy is you wouldn't derive a theory of atoms by quantizing water. That just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, then the graviton doesn't have to exist. And so in that case, gravity would be an emergent force that pretty much only exists as a classical thing, and just talking about its quantum version isn't meaningful.
Interesting. There was something you said there that just blew my mind about what. Can you say that again about what you said about water?
Oh yeah, so you don't get a theory for atoms by quantizing water. It's just not how it works. You can do it the other way around. If once you have a theory for atoms, you can describe water molecules, and then in principle, you can derive hydrodynamics, but it doesn't work the other way.
Interesting. Well, there's some interesting comments being made in the chat there. I'll get to reading your guys' comments later on. So what? Just as a general question. And feel free to answer this from a physics perspective and from a philosophical perspective. But when someone asks you, what is reality? What's your general answer to that?
Trying to leave the room. That's a question which philosophers are better at answering. I mean, there are just loads of approaches that people have put forward. Personally, the way that I approach this question is to say I call something real if it's necessary to describe what we observe. And for all scientific purposes, that's the definition that I stick with. Now, you can ask, like, is this actually something I would use in my everyday life?
Right.
Like, if I wonder, is something real? Then do I write down a list of properties that I have inferred from my observations? Of course not. Right? So in reality, we make this just intuitive judgment. Is something real or isn't it? But if once you actually start to think about it, it becomes a really, really difficult question.
And would you include like the realm of metaphysics in that? So concepts. So like the concept of gravity exists. It's of the subject. Subject being minds. So gravity's the concept of gravity is of the subject, even though it's based on something, a real observation we've made. Would you consider these concepts existing, even though we can't objectively measure them?
Well,
like a concept of love, for example.
Maybe let's stick with gravity.
Sure.
I'm more comfortable with that. So when it comes to gravity, I would ask, well, what's the theory you're working with? Because, I can think of some theories of gravity which just don't describe what we observe. And then I would say, well, they don't describe reality. So it just doesn't work. So if you're talking about general relativity, and you're talking about the gravity described by general relativity, is it real? I would say, yeah, of course it's real. This is what we mean by real, basically. It's an explanation for what we observe.
So even though it's wrong concepts, like the ones that are just dead wrong, like gravity is an apple or whatever, that concept, even though it's wrong, exists somewhere, right? like I'm saying the like the concept of like someone's imagining, like when they imagine gravity they're thinking apple. It's like, even though we can demonstrate that to be wrong, the concept exists somewhere, and that's kind of why we developed like the metaphysical realm to like say, okay, that's the world of concepts that we can't measure, kind of like in phenomenology, when we try to say like, okay, well, how are we going to go about measuring or attempting to measure one's experience? It's like their experience exists as these concepts, but if an alien came to planet Earth and was trying to measure the brain of a human being, they wouldn't see those concepts. They would see brain states, but they wouldn't necessarily see concepts. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is because I talk to physicists sometimes, and they'll say like, oh, well, if I can't measure it, it doesn't exist. But of course, like the concept I have in my mind for the love of my mother, like that exists in some sense, Does that make sense?
Yeah, it exists in some sense. I think I would agree with it. I think the challenge is to figure out in exactly which sense.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so
definitely
for
not
example,
objectively.
if the
Yeah,
alien comes and measures your brain activity, they are missing a lot of information that
right.
you use to make sense of what's going on in your brain. So you wouldn't really expect them to actually understand what it means,
Right.
because they're missing all this context. If they had the context, could they figure it out?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I know like the dream is to have a machine where you can put something on someone's head and then like know all of these subjective and objective things that are going on. I think we need a working theory of consciousness first. Do you ever think about?
You call it a dream. I think a lot of people would call it a nightmare.
Yeah, it probably would be for most of our minds. I think there's a lot of stuff that I think when our brains firing these thoughts to us, and we have this receiving dock where our morality steps in and says, okay, you're not going to get through, but those ones are okay to come through. I think, there's some terrifying things that emerge in our minds that we don't want others to see, I think. I was going to ask you, so what is the most exciting thing to look at in physics right now? What's the thing that gets you up and is like, oh, I hope I get to talk about that thing, or I can't wait to look into what's going on there? James Webb?
That's one of the exciting things. It's actually difficult to pick. So, I mean, I'm very biased because I myself work in the foundations of physics. So I'll always come up with things in the foundations of physics. And it's not because I'm trying to say everything else is uninteresting, but it's just my personal bias. So yeah, James Webb is one, though it'll take a couple of years until we actually have data that we can do something with. So there's some wait. I mean, one of the arguably most interesting developments that's been going on in the past couple of years is quantum computing. There's just so much progress, and I think everyone is really, really curious to see where it will be going, how far they will get, and which method will turn out to be the winner. And this is just really exciting to watch.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah. This is something I had Michio Kaku on not too long ago, and I took him to task on the use of the term God when we're engaging in trying to figure out what is going on in reality. We bring this like hardcore subjective term into theories and things like that in God particle and things like that, or the God theory and different things. Do you think this should be avoided, using this kind of stuff like the love particle, the God particle, do you think this just confuses things?
So personally, those aren't names that I would choose or prefer. But you know how it goes with language. It doesn't always make a lot of sense. Sometimes
Yeah.
certain phrases just stick. The weird thing about those expressions is that they're actually not used among scientists, right? For example, the thing with the God particle. I mean, you know the story. I think probably some editor picked it because it looks good on the book
Of
cover.
course. Yeah.
I guess that the story with the God equation is something similar. Um, I think they do it for publicity reason. I'm not even sure it actually works all that well because religious people might be somewhat offended, that scientists now come and proclaim they have a God equation.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. What are some who are some authors you're reading? Who would you suggest for authors if someone wants to if they're really into mathematics or physics, like who are some authors that you recommend?
Well, it depends very strongly on exactly what they're into.
Right.
So there's kind of a gap, I think, in the literature between the popular science books, the mostly verbal expressions, and then you have the textbooks starting at an undergraduate level. And there are very few books that'll help you make this jump. And one of the good ways to do it, I think, is Aleni Susskind's books, The Theoretical Minimum, because they're on this level where if you weren't a total loser at school, you can get from there to the undergraduate textbook level. So it'll help you to bridge this gap. And I really like to recommend them. I haven't read all of them, but I think I read the first 3 or something, and there's a website that goes with it,
Right.
with lectures and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Did you do well in high school when you were younger?
Sorry, so the answer is yes. I always get
Okay.
confused about exactly what you mean by high school.
By high
because,
school? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it's like the final years of school, right?
Yeah, it's high school is like kind of like grade 10, 11, and 12 for us in Canada. Yeah, so you were a good student. I wasn't ever a good student. I didn't do I was too I was chasing girls and it was hard for me to pay attention in class. I definitely did most of my learning on my own. But yeah, I always like to ask that because people have had different journeys to where they've gotten to. Did you know that you wanted to be to work in science at those ages, or did this come later on for you?
Well, at that age, I was pretty sure I would do something with math and
Yeah.
science. I actually thought for a long time I would do mathematics and then applied math, something. I wasn't really sure. I was always good in mathematics, kind of
Right.
rather boringly. I think it was pretty predictable. But when I was younger, I wanted to become a writer. I wanted to write books. And the reason I didn't pursue this was that I didn't know anyone who made a living from writing, and I had no idea how you would do it.
Right. Yeah, well, now we have YouTube, things like YouTube and ways that people can have careers as communicators. That's another thing about science communication. I've noticed that YouTube, like the fact that so many people, like you can get a pretty damn good education on YouTube and like a combination of YouTube and doing research. Like I think that's an amazing thing for the world, because when you're looking at like trying to go to impoverished areas of the world, you can kind of build curriculums around information that's freely available. And like even like channels like MedCram, if you want to get an education in medicine, like there are so many like free opportunities. Of course, you need access to the internet, but that's one of my goals is I'd like to through my foundation try to find ways to bring better internet access to different parts of the world, and then also bring with that like some kind of guide, and I think skepticism's at the foundation of, okay, lessons in skepticism, continue to question anything, and how does that apply when I go on to the internet and try to find good information. that's what I kind of want. I want to ask you about this. Is like, so obviously there's a lot of junk science out there, right? Science being sold as like, some people like scientists say that it might be X, and then it's just like some guy who just said he's like creating some theory of possibility that it's like, yeah, anything's possible at that stage. But so how do people decipher nonsense from good demonstrable foundations in science when they're navigating the internet?
I think it very strongly depends on what you mean by people. Do you mean people who actually work in the field,
No,
or do you mean people who know nothing about nothing?
I think it's kind of in the middle. The people who like want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and they're navigating. It's like, okay, they understand that nature.com is usually going to get things right, and they're going to provide the citations. But then there's some other organizations, they might see some interesting like Science Now. Scientists say like black holes don't exist, and then there'll be some guys like opinion about this is why he thinks about black holes don't exist, and then it'll just be like an opinion piece and with no citation attached to it. What like how and I'm talking about the layman who wants to know what is going on. Are there any tricks or tips you can give for things to look for? Like, because I see you debunking myths pretty frequently out there. So, is there anything you come across that's pretty common things to look out for?
Well, I'm not going to say anything too surprising. I mean, to begin with, like, I'm a layman in most areas of science, and I think I do the same thing that pretty much everyone does. Like, first of all, I look at reliable outlets. You already said there's Nature. There's also in physics, I mean, there are the society journals that they're often quite boring, honestly, but they're terribly reliable. The membership journals, that kind of stuff, like Physics World, Physics Today, just to name some. You have to be careful with press releases because the people who write press releases themselves often don't really know what they're writing about. And they, as well as the researchers, have an incentive to make things much more exciting than they really are.
Right.
And there are outlets like, for example, Phys.org, where they will just repeat the press release, basically, but it's often not obvious. So one has to be a little bit careful looking at where it actually comes from. Now, beyond that, like, say you come across some website and you read something that's exciting, but you have no idea if you can trust it. I mean, there's the obvious thing. Does this website seem remotely reliable?
Right.
I think we all have some kind of sense like this is a cheap, crappy website where they're just selling rubbish. Then probably the thing you're reading is also rubbish. I think if you start overthinking it, then you're muddying the waters. Like, fairly often the first impression is like the accurate one.
Yeah.
There's also the question like, who else has written about it?
Yeah.
Right. So if it's something that no one else
Consensus.
wants to touch, you're probably doing well ignoring it. And then there is, of course, social media. Like, is there someone on Twitter, someone actually works in the field who has commented on it?
Right.
Like the way that I comment on things in my area, I look at what other people say about topics in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think those are all fairly obvious things. I think it gets really difficult if you fall into a hole where you have pseudo experts and you have no way of really distinguishing them from real experts. And I think that happens to some people.
Yeah, and there's the allure of like conspiratorial thinking that gets mixed in there, where people are like, oh, this expert who said the thing I like, you're just not accepting them because they're saying something that's not going with the mainstream. It's like, no, there's just no demonstration attached to what they're saying. And people get really tied up in that, like and the pandemic is a perfect thing to point at for that, because you get these people coming out of the woodworks who haven't done a damn thing in their field for 20 years, and then they go on some popular guy's podcast and just start talking nonsense, and people are just like, this is
Like
the
me.
nonsense I've been looking for, and they're like, this is the guy that's saying what my intuition was, so I'm going with this guy. And it's like, well, what about the scientific consensus? What about what other people in the field are saying? Oh, there's a conspiracy to keep these people's voices down, because, and it's all coming from this, like, people engaging in confirmation bias, trying to confirm their initial feelings, right? And I wanted to ask you that, like, is there anything in particular you've seen from a science communication perspective when it comes to something like a pandemic that we can improve on? Or is it more of the same that we've been talking about? Or is there something better we can do? Like, one thing I've noticed, the difference between peer review and scientific consensus. People have been conflating these things, thinking that peer review is like if something survives peer review, they're like, oh, now it's going to go get taught to med students. It's like, no, it's got to survive, multiple attempts to falsify this thing by outside sources. That's one thing I noticed. Have you noticed anything else, or did you notice that as well?
So yeah, I mean, there's this. I'm not actually sure if people actually confuse it, or if they just want to confuse it to some extent, so they have something to say about it. It's sometimes really difficult to tell. So when it comes to public health, I think it's a really difficult situation, because especially in a situation like a pandemic, because you have to get out a simple message very quickly, and people have to take it up. So you don't really have the time or the space to add subtleties. And now I think this makes a lot of people understandably skeptic, because it's not how science works, right? If it was a scientific report or something, you would expect all the details and the ifs and buts and the exact numbers and so on and so forth, for which there may just be no time. And I think this is just really, really difficult to find the balance. To some extent, I think the people who have to do this are on some occasions a little bit too self-critical. I think they haven't been doing all too badly. There's maybe one thing that I would like to pick at, is that I think a lot of people who write for the science pages of certain magazines or a website and so on, they kind of misjudge the typical reader of those sites, because a lot of the people who read this are interested in science already, and they have a pretty good education, and they have, in many cases, have some background actually themselves in science, like me, for example, right? Yeah. Just to pick a completely random case.
Yeah.
If I read something about public health, I don't actually know anything about public health, but I do know how science works. And if they don't actually tell me those details, I'm very skeptic if I can trust them.
Right.
And so I kind of wish that every once in a while they would be adding a paragraph that may be above the head of many people, something about blah, 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 and our...
Yeah. Like, if you want to know the actual details, here they
exactly.
are. Yeah.
Exactly, that kind of thing, which is fine, if most people want to ignore it. I would feel better if at least it was there somehow.
Yeah, I have noticed that in some of these more sophisticated publications, they've been linking the actual papers, and I think that's been helping people to understand at least. And of course, virology has been the big focus, and vaccine science has been the big focus during the pandemic. But I like seeing in some of these publications that you can actually click and link to the actual demonstrations in the studies. One thing it does is the laymen who are sitting at home thinking that they know virology now because they saw a news anchor say something. If they come across these articles and they click on all the details in some of these studies, and they see like all of the work and how technical these fields are, perhaps it will humble people to a point to say, okay, I'm not going to yet believe X until I maybe hear a virologist talking about the details as they go through the study, or collect some more information, as opposed to hearing some very vague general information about something that's very technical, and then just basing their belief or opinion on that. Like I think it's good for people to see how in depth and technical these fields are, and the creation of I guess the new age animations and art and things that have been implemented to help people understand how much we actually know about certain fields or certain aspects of certain fields. I think that's helped people a lot as well, to be like, wow, we actually do know a hell of a lot about the things we are wrestling with. It's not just like, scientists in a lab dumping things on COVID-19 and saying, oh, it looks like that burnt it, we'll inject that into our skin. It's much more detailed and advanced than that. Okay, I wanted to ask you something philosophical. How would you describe your moral foundation? Like, how do you solve moral dilemmas in your life?
Well, you can ask questions.
For instance, like, how do you know if something's good or bad? Like, do you call on just to give you my example, it's like I use well-being as a moral metric, kind of like Sam Harris does, where, okay, if something's good for you, it will maximize your biological well-being. Is that close to how you operate, or do you use a different metric, do you think?
So I've honestly never really thought about it. I don't really think in terms of morals, exactly because it's a very philosophically
Right.
loaded expression. But if I have to think about the way that I'm thinking about, I think I basically use the negative instead of trying to increase well-being. It's trying to minimize
Suffering.
people getting hurt or
Yeah.
suffering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's cool. Okay, cool. Yeah. There's, yeah, I'll just think about that. Last thing, and then we'll finish by talking about your new book, because I want to know what we can expect in it. Tell me about your music, like your journey through music, and you do have some music on your YouTube channel, right?
I used to have music on my YouTube channel. I have now put it in a different channel because
Okay.
there's so many people who have told me it really confuses the algorithm, if you talk about science. And then every once in a while there's a music video, and most of your subscribers are like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
Right.
I actually go through the same thing, because I sometimes drop like a new song on my channel, and people are like, what? I didn't subscribe for this shit. Like, I'm sorry, I just wanted to
Exactly
share
that
it.
kind of
So
thing. Yeah,
I
it's
started a
like
new channel.
I've thought about this for a long time, because to some extent I feel like that's me, right? It belongs together.
Yeah.
But then also, I think people get generally confused, and I don't really want this. So in the end, so I have two separate channels. But also, I haven't had any time in the past year to actually do anything.
Right.
For a completely different reason. All this pandemic thing, if you
Yeah.
remember, it
Yeah.
has really taken up a lot of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately.
And what's your main instrument?
I actually don't play any instruments.
Oh, you don't?
I'm a computer person.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry. I mean, I learned to play the piano,
Oh, okay.
and I learned to play drums at some point. So I kind of know how they work basically,
Nice.
but I can't actually play them. I did learn to sing on YouTube
Cool.
actually.
Nice.
So that's what I do. I have my self-made recording studio in the basement.
Yeah.
It's right next to my green screen. You never see this in my videos, but I'm standing right next to the recording thing.
That's cool. Yeah, I have my piano right here always. I've been playing piano since I was 3 and basically singing my whole life as well and composing. And yeah, I think, some form, usually when people are kind of down and their general level of inspiration in their life is low, I find that there seems to be a lack of artistic inspiration, and in those who have some kind of artistic outlet seem to be generally feeling quite well and inspired about life. And so I'm always happy to see someone who's found music or found a way to express themselves artistically. Do you think it improves your ability to communicate science in any way? Do you feel a crossover there?
Well, so it definitely improves my work-life balance. Like I have like a real problem when I'm working on something very intensely, like a physics thing, and there are problems that I've been thinking about for 10 years, or that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it keeps me up at night. And
Yeah.
there may be things I can't get it out of my head like for weeks in a row. It's really, really stressful.
Yeah.
And I find that doing something artistic, I used to paint actually, and now I do songs. It's like the only thing that actually clears out my head.
Yeah.
So it really helps me, and then often it also helps me to actually solve the problem that I've been thinking about. Does it help for the science communication? Actually, one of the reasons I was putting those videos, the music videos, on my channel was that I was thinking music would be a good way to communicate science.
Yeah.
So I did some songs like a couple of years ago about physics topics, like Schrödinger's cat. Made a song about Schrödinger's cat, and I
Awesome.
did one about theories of everything, basically.
Cool.
And hang on, I did a third one. Oh, about symmetry breaking.
Oh, okay.
And
Very
then
cool.
it's all like a little bit weird, but yeah. So the idea was that you would have an artistic expression of a particular idea or something, and then also explain what it was about. Like, what was it that you were trying to
Right.
express?
Oh, I love that. I'm going to have to take a look at that. You guys make sure you go over and check out Sabine's music channel. I'm sure you'll find it if you type in Sabine Hassenfelder music. Okay, last thing I wanted to ask you about your new book. What can we expect?
So yeah, the new book is called Existential Physics, a scientist's guide to life's biggest questions. So
Wow.
it's very,
Okay.
very modest.
Yeah.
The title wasn't my idea; it was my editor's.
Oh,
I think he
I love it.
he did a pretty good job. It's much better than my original title. And yeah, so the book is pretty much what the title says. So each chapter is a question, like a really big question, like, is human behavior predictable? Has physics ruled out free will? Does the past still exist? Does the universe think? That kind of thing. And then I have an extensive answer in that question, often with several sub-questions to the original question.
Right. And you are a determinist, I believe?
I'm a determinist. If you mean, do I believe that nature fundamentally is deterministic?
Yeah.
At the moment, yes. But ask me again next year, maybe I'll change my mind.
All right. Well, that's what the scientific endeavor is all about. It's some of these theories could be turned on their head next year, right? Well, Sabine, thank you so much for joining me today. I really look forward to having you come to Canada and to spread some scientific inspiration to my country. And yeah, I just really enjoyed my conversation with you today. Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah. All right, guys. Sabine Hossenfelder, that was so awesome. Go and subscribe to her channel. If you're new to the Pangburn channel, please subscribe. And drop a like on this video if you enjoyed this discussion. This was pretty impromptu. It was a nice early conversation. I actually, I have to say, I kind of like having conversations early in the morning. I don't know. It felt good. Lots of energy. So many things. There's so many amazing clips that we're going to be pulling out of this conversation. Sabine is just absolutely brilliant, and you guys please go buy her book. Check out her stuff. Her YouTube channel is, if not the best, one of the best science communication channels going out there. She's hilarious in her videos, an amazing sense of humor, and I'm just so thrilled to be working with her on this Celebration of Science and Reason tour. If you guys can get up to Canada to come to these events, please do. Thanks, Cybernaut. Thanks, Iron Charioter, for your moderation here. How's it going, Finn, Tim, Kaylee, JY? Thanks, guys. Drop a like. And we'll see you guys next time. We will be live today on this channel with a group discussion today. So stay tuned for that. And as always, let art and science inspire. Thanks, guys.